Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, comunidade DCM. Hoje eu trago aqui para vocês um convidado mais do que especial, alguém que escreveu história e alguém que eu pessoalmente admiro muito, John Kiriakou, o ex-agente da CIA, que foi o whistleblower, que foi o denunciante da tortura da CIA. A primeira vez que alguém interno da CIA denunciou, teve a coragem de denunciar que existiam tortura como política de Estado e campos secretos de tortura nos Estados Unidos. Ele era um dos oficiais mais altos da CIA, inclusive ele esteve envolvido em operações bastante importantes depois do setembro. Ok, Marília Corta. Ele esteve envolvido em operações bastante importantes na partir do 11 de setembro. Em um momento da vida dele, ele decidiu que ele tinha que denunciar esses crimes de guerra. John Kiriakou, it's a pleasure to have you here. I'm delighted to have you in Brazil, the Brazilian audience.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, John, I think you have a very unique path in your life. You were a CIA agent. You were very identified with the institution by looking at your career. I would say you were someone who assimilated the values of that institution and that enjoyed your job.
I did.
And you did a 180 degrees change in your life. And I want to talk to you about that. I want to talk to you also about what the CIA does in Latin America. I'd like to also touch upon Stephen Bannon's prison and a little bit of the Brazilian situation right now, which we understand America played a huge part in the recent coup against Dilma Rousseff in the form of an impeachment. So, John, I want to start very simply. I want to know how can you tell us how you became a CIA agent?
Oh, sure. It's a funny story. It's funny, strange, and it's not legal anymore, and I'll explain that. But when I was in graduate school, I was at George Washington University in Washington, D.C., working on a master's degree in legislative affairs, and I was taking a class called The Psychology of Leadership. And it was taught by a very important psychiatrist. He had a PhD in political science, a PhD in psychology, and a medical degree. And he called himself a political psychiatrist. Very interesting class on how foreign leaders make their decisions. And so he gave us an assignment to write a paper one day where we had to follow our bosses for a week. And at the time, I was working for a trade union in Washington, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union, and I had to follow my boss for the week and then write a psychological profile about him. Well, halfway through the week, he and I got into a very serious argument, and I called him a racist, which he was. And he got very angry. He balled up his fists to punch me, and I put my hands up to protect myself, and his face got red, and he said, "My penis is bigger than yours." And I said, "What?" He said, "My penis is bigger than yours." And I said, "You know what? You're insane," and I quit. And I walked out, and I actually did quit. So I wrote my paper, and I told this story. And I said that I believed he was a sociopath with psychopathic tendencies, and I gave examples. And I turned the paper in. Well, a week later, I got the paper back, and I got an A. And in the margin, the professor wrote, "Please see me after class." So I went to see him. He closed the door of his office, and he said to me, "Look, I'm not really a professor here. I'm a CIA officer undercover as a professor here, and I'm looking for people who I think would fit into the CIA's culture. I think you would fit into the CIA's culture. Do you want to be a CIA officer?" The truth was, I was getting married in 6 weeks. I had no job. I didn't know what I was going to do. So I said, "Sure, I'd like to be a CIA officer." And the next thing I knew, after I passed all of the tests, I was in the CIA. Now, they can't do that anymore. In 1993, we passed a law called the Equal Employment Opportunity Act. And so it's much less sexy. You have to go to www.cia.gov and click apply now. But that's how I got in. It was through that that private network of contacts.
Did he explain to you how you would fit, how he thought you would fit in the CIA
Yes,
culture?
he did. He did. And he recruited me into the analytics side of the CIA. And so for the first half of my career, I was the intelligence community's classified biographer for Saddam Hussein. I was the one who coordinated all of the psychological profiles on Saddam Hussein. And the reason they gave me that job at such a young age, I was only 25 years old, was because nothing ever happened in Iraq. It was the same government since 1968, the same leadership. We had a very small embassy there. We really didn't have any national interests in Iraq until Iraq invaded Kuwait. And that act made me a star at the CIA.
And is it still practiced today that CIA professors or CIA or agents are undercover as teachers in institutions to recruit young people?
No, they don't do that anymore because of this Equal Employment Opportunity Act. But what they did, they still have professors at universities all over America, but it's called the Scholar in Residence program. So now they come and say, I'm a CIA officer. I'm going to retire in 3 years. So for the final 3 years of my career, I'm going to be a professor here. So it's all very public and out in the open. They don't do it secretly anymore.
You told you became a star all of a sudden. Can you elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah. It was the morning of August 2nd, 1990. I had been at the CIA for about 9 months, and I had just started to feel like I really knew what I was doing. And I really knew what I was talking about. And, the night before, we all expected Saddam was going to cross the border into Kuwait, and he was going to attack the Kuwaiti government. And so I got up early, and sure enough, during the night, Iraq had invaded Kuwait. So I showered and shaved and got dressed as quickly as I could. I got into the office at 7 o'clock, and my boss said, as soon as I got there, my boss said, "Don't take your jacket off. We're going to the White House." I had never been to the White House before. And again, I'm only 25 years old. So we take a car to the White House, and the Marine escorts us into the Oval Office. I've never been to the Oval Office. And so here I am, sitting with the president, the vice president, the secretary of state, the secretary of defense, the national security advisor, the director of the CIA, my boss, and me. And so I remember thinking, if my friends could see this, they wouldn't believe it in a million years. And we're sitting there, and the president says, "Well, now what do we do?" And everybody turns and looks at me. And I thought, this is my chance. So I said, "Well, Mr. President, Iraqi forces entered the country at 2 a.m. They moved here, they moved there. This is what happened. The royal family fled to Saudi Arabia." I gave the full briefing because I really did know what I was talking about. And I had just coincidentally, there was a Kuwaiti physician who was very political and was one of the founding members of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. And I had written a paper about him the week before, just because he was interesting to me. And during the night, the Iraqis announced that he would be the new president of occupied Kuwait. So I was an expert on this guy. I knew everything about him. And it changed the course of my career. I became a star that day.
You held, after that day, you became a star, but your career didn't end there. You had a very senior position at the CIA. What exactly was your role as a senior analyst and case officer? What do you do?
The first 7 years that I was an analyst, I was promoted over and over and over again, working always on Iraq. And so, just to give you an example, I was one of the co-authors of UN Security Council Resolution 986, which created the sanctions regime on Iraq. It allowed Iraq to purchase food and medicines, but pretty much nothing else. I didn't like that job. you sit at a desk all day, you think the big thoughts, and you write papers that most of the time nobody reads. And every day for years and years, it was Iraq, Iraq, Iraq all the time. And I got bored. And so, as you might imagine, I spoke fluent Arabic and fluent Greek. And as it turned out, I was the only person in the entire CIA that was fluent in those two languages. And then a job opened in Athens in counterterrorism operations. And they were looking for somebody who spoke either Greek or Arabic. So I went to the officer in charge of hiring for this job and I said, look, I'm an analyst and I have literally zero experience in operations, but I speak fluent Greek and Arabic. And he said, are you kidding me? And I said, no. He said, are you willing to be tested? I said, of course. So they tested me and I tested fluent. And he told me, the job is yours. He said, it's easier, cheaper, and faster for us to hire a linguist and teach him operations than it would be to take an operations officer and teach him how to speak Greek and Arabic. So they gave me the job. I went through all of the operational training, weapons, explosives, driving, recruiting spies to steal secrets. And they sent me to Athens and I worked against one specific terrorist group called Revolutionary Organization 17 November and against a myriad of Arab groups, Abu Nidal, the Libyans, PFLP, PFLP-GC, DFLP. They were all in Athens. And so that's what I did for the next 2 years.
And as your spy, you moved, as you say, you moved several times abroad. Mm-hmm. You flew in Arabic. You were almost assassinated by leftists,
yes,
as far as I know. And you were part of the operation that captured Abu Zubaydah, mm-hmm. which is currently held in Guantanamo.
Yes.
And you led a secret life working for the CIA in the war on terror. But in December 2007, you decided to blow the whistle and mm-hmm. disclose this classified information, officially confirming that the US government was using torture to interrogate mm-hmm. Al-Qaeda prisoners. And you were then the first office to denounce this practice and to say goodbye, to kiss goodbye to your entire career.
Yes.
So can you tell us about the process that led you to mm-hmm. such a 180 decision in your life?
Yes. I have always been a very firm believer in the rule of law and in respect for human rights and civil liberties. That made me unusual as a CIA officer. I had been the chief of CIA counterterrorism operations in Pakistan after the 9/11 attacks. And I was responsible, as you said, for the capture of Abu Zubaydah, who was we believed at the time, the number 3 in Al-Qaeda. He was the first high-value target that we captured. And when I got home from Pakistan, a senior officer asked me if I was interested in being trained in what he called enhanced interrogation techniques. He explained to me what this was, and I said, "Woo, this sounds like a torture program." He said, "No, it's not a torture program. The Justice Department approved it, and the president approved it, and it's legal." I said, "This sounds bad. I'm not interested."
Was it legal, or he was just telling you stories?
Oh, the Justice Department said that it was legal. There's a famous memo written by John Yoo and Jay Bybee, 2 officials at the Justice Department, who essentially turned the law on its head, and they claimed that it was legal. But we had a long history in the United States with the 1946 Torture Act, with our signature on the United Nations Convention Against Torture. So to me, it was quite clear that this was an illegal operation.
And you didn't cross your mind that maybe the CIA did this?
Well, the CIA didn't do it until August 1st, 2002. Okay. See, in 1975, the CIA was caught overthrowing governments and assassinating world leaders. And the Congress created two oversight committees, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. And from 1975, thanks to Executive Order 12333, assassinations and covert actions to overthrow governments were made illegal.
I see.
Well, 9/11 changed everything. The president secretly revoked Executive Order 12333. Secretly revoked it. And so the CIA put together teams that they were flying around the world. George W. Bush. The CIA put together teams that they flew around the world to murder, whoever they wanted to murder. And they just decided that the Torture Act didn't exist. And I said, if you're going to torture prisoners, I don't want any part of it. None whatsoever. But I waited for somebody to come out and say something. I thought, certainly, this is so illegal. It's so egregious that somebody's going to come out and say something. And nobody said a word. So from 2002, early 2002, until December of 2007, nobody said a word. And then in December 2007, I decided that I would say something. And I had a request from ABC News, one of the major broadcast networks here in the United States. And I decided that I was just going to tell the truth, that I thought the American people had a right to know what the government was doing in their name. And they had a right to know that the CIA was violating both U.S. and international law, besides the fact that torture just simply doesn't work.
And did you know there was just... How you were so certain, because you need to be so certain that this is actually happening, to go in the live TV, in American television, to go and blow the whistle. You must have seen things. What have you seen?
When I got home from Pakistan, I was promoted and I became the executive assistant to the CIA's deputy director for operations. And as the deputy director's assistant, I had access to literally everything that the CIA was doing around the world. And they were reporting from secret prison sites all around the world what they were doing to these prisoners. And there was just no question in my mind that this was an illegal program.
And how did you I don't know if you're able to say this, but how did you get all those documents that could prove that you are not a crazy former CIA agent? Because you would be certainly stigmatized coming from the CIA
Certainly.
And blowing the whistle. You would be the one who's crazy, and they will try to pin on something else. They
Yes.
certainly say, this guy has any problems and he's trying to make up things. They will want to see proof. How did you get this proof?
I did not take out any documents from the CIA. That would be espionage. And so I actually have a really great memory for detail. And so I was able to provide detail of these illegal programs, the secret prison system, the international rendition program, where they would kidnap people and then take them to other countries to be tortured, and the torture program. And I was able to provide the journalists at ABC News with the names of former CIA officers who could confirm what it was that I had said.
Psychologically, what happens to you after you went and blew the whistle? What were you expecting?
The entire weight of the U.S. government falls on your head. What happened was within 24 hours, the CIA filed what's called a crimes report against me with the FBI, saying that I had committed espionage by revealing the program. And so the FBI investigated me for a full year, from December of 2007 to December of 2008. But then in December of 2008, they closed the case and they said that I hadn't violated the law. What I did not know was that 3 weeks later, when Barack Obama became president, John Brennan, who was an old colleague of mine and was named first Deputy National Security Advisor and then CIA Director, he asked the Justice Department to secretly reopen the case against me. And I didn't know that for the next 3 years, the FBI was following me everywhere. They were tapping my phones. They were intercepting my emails. And then finally, in January of 2012, I was arrested and charged with 5 felonies, including 3 counts of espionage. In the United States, as in most countries, espionage is one of the gravest crimes with which an American can be charged.
Yeah.
National security. And in many cases, it carries with it the death penalty. And so, yeah, psychologically, it's very hard.
So when we received that, did you have a lawyer?
I hired a dream team of the best defense lawyers in Washington. And to tell you the truth, they came to me because this was such a major case on not just a national security issue, but on constitutional issues. I have a constitutional right, for example, to freedom of speech. And if a program is illegal, by definition, it can't be classified. You can't classify a crime for the purpose of keeping it from the American people.
You told us in the program, the Chasing Justice, that I had the pleasure to share the panel with you. You told about American laws that do not accept that you classify documents as illegal when you're trying to hide crimes. Which law is that? That would be interesting.
Oh, it's a law that's been on the books for a very long time, since 1975, since the revamping of the CIA. In fact, George W. Bush's classification czar was his unofficial title, I guess. He was the chief classification officer at the Pentagon, has said in court that as much as 80% of classified documents in the U.S. intelligence community should not be classified. They shouldn't have been classified in the first place.
That leads to my next question. So you are the first CIA officer to be convicted for passing classified information. You served 2 years to the press in federal prison. It seems that you're just telling me that it would not be correct for them to hide their crimes under the cloak of confidentiality. So the US justice system seems to work to corroborate the CIA's illegal practice and illegal version when they indicted you.
Yes.
And it seems accomplice of the US justice system to hide torture as a state policy.
You're exactly right about this.
So what kind of penetration do you think the CIA has in the U.S. judicial system and in the legislative?
It's very, very deep. And I think that we see examples of that every day in the Julian Assange case. In my own case, in discovery, we received memos from the Justice Department. And these memos included a series of 3. One was from John Brennan at the CIA to Eric Holder, the Attorney General. And it said, charge him with espionage. And Holder wrote back and said, my people don't think he committed espionage. And John Brennan wrote, charge him anyway and make him defend himself. And that's what they did. And they waited until I went bankrupt. And then they dropped all the espionage charges because they knew I hadn't committed espionage. But this is what they do. It was revenge.
With the justice system.
Yes, and the Justice Department does what the CIA tells it to do. It's been like that for many years.
Oh, so can you explain a bit, can you explore a bit with us the DOJ, Department of Justice, their connection with the CIA?
Yeah.
Because it's quite important for us to understand.
Sure. The specific connection, and I'll apologize to your viewers in advance because this is a little bit bureaucratic, but there's a specific office at the Justice Department called the Office of Legal Counsel, OLC. The purpose of OLC is to decide if things that the CIA wants to do are legal or illegal. So let's say the CIA says, we want to overthrow the British government. OLC will say, no, you can't do that. That's not legal. So the CIA says, okay, we want to overthrow the Libyan government. Okay, that's legal. You can do that. But what happens is that OLC becomes really little more than a rubber stamp, so that if the CIA really, really wants to do something, OLC will justify it legally. So, for example, the CIA wanted to create a torture program. So they went to OLC and said, we want to create a torture program. OLC said, well, you can't do that because torture is illegal. We have the Federal Torture Act of 1946, and we're signatories, not just signatories, but we were the actual drafters of the United Nations Convention Against Torture. And they said, well, at the CIA, we really, really want to do this torture program, so just figure it out. So what they did in this series of memos called the U-Bibi memos was they said that, well, yes, the law says that you can't torture people, but what is torture really? If it doesn't leave a mark on your body, is it really torture? We think it's not. So torture is legal. And because this was all classified, it was all top secret, nobody could sue them in the federal courts and say, wait a minute, the law is very clear, torture's illegal, and this U-Bibi memo is wrong. Nobody knew there was a U-Bibi memo because it was classified. So that's how the CIA exerts its influence. Now, fast forward to Mike Pompeo. Mike Pompeo in 2000, whenever it was, 2017, decides he wants to kill Julian Assange because of the Vault 7 revelations. He's so angry, he says, let's kill him. They go to the Office of Legal Counsel and they say, we want to kill this guy. Well, you can't, because he's an Australian national. And you can't kill a citizen of an allied country, especially a Five Eyes country, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, US, UK. You can't do it. But OLC said, well, what we can do is we can say that he's a representative of a hostile non-state intelligence service. That would make it legal. Well, it wouldn't, actually, but they would argue.
So this was not just rhetoric or dramatic license to qualify him. This was a technical term that he employed to authorize.
See, but nobody realized that. Nobody realized that at the time. In fact, we laughed about it. I even wrote an article about it. Like, why is he saying something so stupid that this is a hostile non-state actor? Well, there was actually a very serious reason why he said it, because then it allowed OLC to legally justify the assassination of Julian Assange. So why was Julian not assassinated? Because what happens is it goes from the CIA to the Office of the Legal Counsel, and then from the Office of the Legal Counsel, it goes to the General Counsel, the attorneys at the National Security Council at the White House. Well, whatever the CIA and OLC want to do, they just approve it. They never say no. Then it goes to the National Security Advisor. If he signs it, it goes to the president, and the president signs it, and it becomes something called a presidential finding. What happened in the case of Julian Assange is it got to the National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, General H.R. McMaster, and he said, are you people insane? We're not going to murder an Australian national. And he's the one who killed it. That's why Julian Assange is still alive.
Let's say Pakistani or
he'd be
Brazilian,
dead.
He would be dead.
He'd be dead today. Yes.
What do you think is going to happen to Julian Assange if he's extradited? What do you think the perspectives?
If Julian Assange is extradited, I think he'll die in an American prison. But I really don't think that he will be extradited. Certainly this is going to take some time because there are several more levels of appeal available to the United States. The latest appeal was just heard in the Court of Appeals. I think Julian's going to win there. If Julian wins, the United States could elect to appeal to the British Supreme Court, and if they lose there, they could appeal again to the European Court of Human Rights. But there are 3 precedents at the European Court of Human Rights where European nationals who the United States was seeking to extradite won their case is against extradition because of the way that the United States uses solitary confinement as a punishment. Nils Melzer, the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, has said repeatedly over the years that the U.S. practice of solitary confinement is a form of torture. The international standard is that you cannot be held in solitary confinement for more than 15 days. Well, in the United States, we have prisoners who have been in solitary confinement for as long as 44 years.
I know, one of them just been released by the amnesty.
Yes. Now, how in the world is that person supposed to come out of prison with his mind in order after not having human contact of any kind for 44 years? Of course it's torture. And so I'm confident the Europeans are not going to force Julian Assange to the United States.
So help us God.
I hope so.
You've been in prison yourself. And can you explain to us a bit this experience? Because you've been not only in prison, but you've been in prison for doing the right thing. Yeah. You've been in prison for,
which was a little tough,
saving lives. I think if you kill someone, you went to prison, it must be hard. But when you do the right thing and you are stigmatized and sitting there alone, that is another level. And you told me that you sympathize with Lula, with Mandela, that you took strength from those kind of people. I just want to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, let me make two comments about that. First of all, I went to a real prison. I didn't go to a country club where I could play tennis and read books all day. I went to an actual prison with bad people, drug kingpins and mafia dons, and fully 1/3 of the prison population was pedophiles. So this was a tough place. I decided that the CIA had trained me to live in some of the worst places on earth. And God knows that I had served in places that were far, far worse than this prison. And so I just decided to rely on my CIA training to make sure that I stayed safe and stayed at the top of the social heap in
Were
prison.
you afraid of your existence, of your physical existence?
Oh, yeah. In the beginning. But one of the things that the CIA taught us to do in training was to make strategic alliances. And so I took that very, very seriously. The Italians, and when I say Italians, I mean the members of the 5 organized crime families in New York adopted me for 2 reasons. Number one, because I'm Greek. And the Italians and the Greeks are very, very close. Yeah. And number 2, I hate the FBI as much as they do.
I see.
And so they pulled me into their circle very quickly. A rumor got started somehow that I was an assassin for the CIA, and the Nazis loved that. And so, so I had no problem with the Nazis, the Aryans. At the same time, the week that I went to prison, Louis Farrakhan, the leader of the Nation of Islam, a black Muslim group here in the United States, wrote a newspaper article in his own newspaper saying that I was a hero of the Muslim people because I gave up my freedom in the name of human rights. And so the blacks were okay with me. And then the only ones that I was a little more worried about were the Mexican cartel members.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because they're violent just for the sake of violence.
No.
And so one of them was in my cell. He was one of my cellmates. And he asked me one day if I was educated. And I said, yes. And he asked me if I would write his appeal. And I said, well, I'm not a lawyer. And he said, yeah, but you're educated. And I said, you know what? You're right. How hard could it be to write an appeal? I said, sure, I'll write your appeal. I didn't have anything else to do but sit in my cage all day long.
Okay.
So I did some research and I wrote his appeal. And he lost, but I didn't charge him anything, which surprised him. And I said, no, I have people on the outside. I don't need any money. What are you going to give me? $10 worth of tuna fish, or Diet Coke or something? you don't owe me anything. So he spread the word among the Mexicans that I was a good guy. And so I never had any problem with anybody. So that was the first thing. The second thing was that I have great admiration for people like Nelson Mandela and President Lula and Martin Luther King. And these were people who, in my view, were gravely wronged by their governments, wronged in far worse ways than I was. You know, people who went to prison for decades, people like Martin Luther King, who was assassinated because of what he believed in. And so if they could forgive the people who wronged them, I could forgive the people who wronged me. I only lost 2 years of my life, not 35 years. And so I just decided that the future looked brighter than the past, and I was going to treat it as water under the bridge. And so that's what I did.
And it shows. It totally shows.
Thank you.
John, you told me that you have a Brazilian partner.
I do.
Yeah.
My girlfriend is a Brazilian national. We've been seeing each other for 3 years. She began as a journalist and then finished a PhD in anthropology. So she worked as an anthropologist for many years, studying the tribes up the Amazon. It's funny, when we first started dating, she would disappear for 6 weeks, 8 weeks at a time because she was so far up the Amazon that there was no cell phone connectivity. And she would come back with wonderful pictures. And then she got a job with the Inter-American Development Bank, helping to do large-scale development in Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, and Paraguay. Because really the issue that's most important to her in her life is fighting poverty. And so that's what she's dedicated herself to. But yeah, we've had a fun time together. 3 years is kind of a long time, and things are going well.
Great. And I hope you can come to Brazil soon. And
I look forward to that.
I hope to be there to receive you.
Thank you so much.
John, I have more questions. And this question is about a bit what's going on in Brazil. As you know, as you say, Lula was gravely wronged. Dilma Rousseff as well.
Wronged.
She was impeached. But the good thing is that, you know, Glenn Greenwald received a trove of information, and the Intercept leaked conversations, which are now official court documents. And they reveal that the former judge and former Justice Minister of Bolsonaro, Seja, and his prosecutor and the former prosecutor, Dallagnol, they had a secretive, extra-official and collusive collaboration with the U.S. Department of Justice, DOJ, that you just mentioned. It has insertion with the CIA. And in this anti-corruption, everything under the name of anti-corruption, which was the car wash operation. The same operation that led to Lula's imprisonment, prevent him to run the election in 2018, and what opened the way for the Bolsonaro era. So, The Intercept, I'm going to read it here, revealed that they secretly hosted a delegation. I'm going to quote The Intercept, quote, "They secretly host delegations of U.S. officials and coached and facilitate U.S. efforts to secure cooperation of witnesses in corruption investigation into state-controlled oil giant Petrobras. With the approval of car wash prosecutors, the U.S. negotiated deals with some witnesses without following any of the procedures on the treaties, which would have given Brazil greater control over the process." So they went to the extra official way of collaboration, whatever that might have been. So can you explain to us in general, like, what is the U.S. government role in such foreign operations, and how they co-opt these figures like Moro and Dallagnol? People in Brazil have a lot of difficulty to understand that this is not conspiracy theory, that the CIA co-opt.
No, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is a prime example of the United States interfering in the internal affairs of another country. Now, this is something that in any other situation would result in a very strong diplomatic protest, right? Because it really is interference. And it's not just the Justice Department. I would say, I would warn people that it's also the State Department. In fact, I would go so far as to say that it begins with the State Department. It includes the Justice Department. It includes certainly the Treasury Department, because in many cases, money laundering charges just appear out of nowhere, or corruption charges. That's the Treasury Department. And now we have to worry about the Department of Homeland Security as well. And the whole time, you also have the CIA working behind the scenes. So this is not a conspiracy. This is a concerted effort by the most important elements of the American government to essentially install leaders overseas who they like and who are going to support the American agenda, and to destroy, not just to push out, but to destroy those leaders who don't support the American agenda. Also, you and I were talking offline a little before we started filming, and I said how in the United States we have two parties. We have the Democrats and the Republicans. And the Republicans call the Democrats the radical left, and the Democrats call the Republicans the radical right. The truth is they're both right of center parties, right? The Democrats are a little bit right of center, and the Republicans are very right of center. There's nothing radical about the Democrats. There's nothing left-wing about the Democrats. But with that said, overseas, anybody whose ideology is to the left of the Democrats is communist. And communism is a threat to the United States. That's the mentality here. Here we are all these years after the Berlin Wall fell and the Soviet Union broke apart. People are still obsessed with the idea of progressive political movements overseas. Here in the United States, people are up in arms right now that Daniela Ortega won the presidency of Nicaragua again, for example. The Biden administration, that's supposed to be so progressive and so radically left-wing, refuses to reestablish diplomatic relations with the government of Cuba. Well, look at Brazil. Look at President Lula. Look at Dilma Rousseff. They had no ill intent against the United States, right? They were democratically elected officials of their country. And the United States decided, oh, we don't like them. We want somebody far more right-wing. So instead of interfering in the election, or maybe I should say just interfering in the election, a program was hatched to destroy them. And so poor President Lula ended up in prison. President Rousseff ended up with her reputation destroyed. And the world ended up with Jair Bolsonaro.
I want to add a few to this conversation, if you allow me to.
Please.
You talked about the CIA, and that's not a conspiracy theory. I mean, those leaks showed, for anyone who has ears and could read, can see the leaks and could see from their own mouth and their own admission that they have been involved extraofficially with the Department of Justice. But not only that, there was more leaked messages where this prosecutor, Dallagnol, referred to the Lula imprisonment as a gift from the CIA plane. And then Jair Bolsonaro and Sérgio Moro, the judge who put Lula in jail, they made an unprecedented visit to the CIA headquarters in Langley after coming to power with the backing of Wall Street, according to the investigations of Brazil Wire. So we know, knowing that the CIA operates to safeguard the US corporate and political interests worldwide in light of this fact, what do you think could have happened there? To which extent of the CIA had a role in the collaboration of the Brazilian car wash operation? How do you think that operation could have happened?
Oh, very easily, I think. First of all, let me stress how unusual it is for a foreign leader to go to CIA headquarters. Very, very unusual. You know, every once in a while, I would be called on to brief a foreign leader. But it was usually like, I did one time the Prime Minister of Fiji, or the Deputy Prime Minister of Albania, or something like that. But for the president of a major world country like Brazil to go to CIA headquarters is
And
a judge,
imprison
and
Lula.
I when you first mentioned that, I was trying to think of another example where something like that happened, and I couldn't think of any time while I was at the CIA that anything like that ever happened. It's so inappropriate that I can't even imagine how it was approved in the first place, unless it was part of an operation to essentially destroy Lula and take over the Brazilian government. I think that's really what it came down to. You know, there's a joke at the CIA, it's kind of an open joke, that intelligence is a cash business, right? When I was in Pakistan, in 6 months, I probably spent $10 million in cash. We were throwing money out of the side of helicopters, right, at Afghan warlords. And, you know, money, I couldn't spend the money fast enough. Literally an unlimited budget. Well, you know what? The CIA is not averse to making a little deal on the side. Maybe this judge would like to have a new house, or maybe his son would like to go to an American university, all expenses paid.
Well, he went to 60 Minutes. Nobody knew who he was. He was on 60 Minutes.
See? So there's always a deal. Everybody has a price. You know, they teach us in spy school what the motivating factors are. Why would people want to work for the CIA? Why would they want to spy for the CIA? 90% of them, it's money, right? Money's easy. We have more money than we can count. We'll just give you as much money as you want if you produce for us. For some people, it's ideology. They're true believers in the United States, and they want to do something to help the United States. That there aren't many people like that. It's a couple of percent. But the other motivating factor is hatred. You hate your boss. He passed you over for promotion. You hate the other political party. You hate Lula. You want to ruin him. You know, hatred is a very motivating factor.
It is.
Money is secondary. But if you're someone who has such deep hatred for someone and you're in a position to destroy his life, you'd be surprised at the number of people who actually pursue that. And so I think we're seeing a combination of things here. I wouldn't be at all surprised if money changed hands, probably a lot of money. But I also wouldn't be surprised if hatred was one of the motivating factors.
Beautiful. So it's not only instrumental. There is something that happened lately. Well, we were talking about the Stephen Bannon prison, right? Here offline. And we know that one of the sons, Jair Bolsonaro has 4 sons who obey, at the same time they obey Jair Bolsonaro. They also are the one dominating Jair Bolsonaro. It's quite a very weird relationship they have with each other. But one of his sons was accused of helping plotting the Capitol invasion on the 6th of January. He apparently was involved with one of the groups that helped, and he was actually there on the 6th.
Really?
Yeah, he was with one of the guys that was one of the head figures that helped in the Capitolio. And he has a long story of thinking that he's American, of American patriotism. Part of his ideology it's based on that feeling. And Stephen Bannon now has been jailed. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible that the CIA, FBI might be monitoring the son of Jair Bolsonaro?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, they're still monitoring me, and I'm nobody. So, yeah, you know, we've got a situation here in the United States where the technology now is so advanced that literally everybody is liable for surveillance. The NSA has built a new facility in the state of Utah that has enough computer memory storage that it can save every phone call, every text message, and every email from every American for the next 500 years. Yes. The courts have also ruled that warrantless wiretapping is not a constitutional violation.
Oh,
And
it's not.
so it's not, because, all you have to say
Even
is
for the
terrorism.
foreigner.
Yes, 9/11, terrorism, right? And so so everybody is liable to being spied on. It's not just against the law, but it's a part of NSA's charter, their founding charter, that they are not allowed to spy on U.S. persons, that is, an American citizen or anybody in the United States on an immigrant visa. But they do that every day, and the courts refuse to stop them. So take that and couple it with the idea that the FBI's job is to surveil everybody, right? It's a law enforcement organization. And the CIA's job is to at least electronically surveil foreign nationals. We know, for example, thanks to Ed Snowden, that the CIA was intercepting Angela Merkel's cell phone for years. Well, she's one of our closest friends. So that just confirms the idea that we spy on everybody.
Do you think
Just in
Eduardo
case.
Bolsonaro should be afraid of the CIA?
I don't think he should be afraid, because I think the CIA loves him. They love
Why?
strong men and fascist, right-wing politicians. But I would also assume, if I were Jair Bolsonaro, that all of his communications are being monitored, all of them. And you might ask why. You would ask why
It seems
Angela
like a
Merkel.
contradiction.
Yeah, it seems like a
with Jair
contradiction.
Bolsonaro. Yeah.
Yeah, but the information collected isn't just to sit in CIA files. It's to share with American companies, to give them a leg up on trade, on banking, on finance. You can use this close hold information in any number of ways. And usually at the end of the day, the reason is a financial one.
Very interesting. I want to touch upon a bit of a different thematic. I myself, as a lawyer, I consider that one of the biggest threats of Brazilian democracy, those Christian fanatic churches from the charismatic movement, originated in deep south of the United States.
Yes.
We call here neo-Pentecostal churches. And they introduced deliberately a strategy from Washington as a way to reduce the influence of the left-leaning Catholic movement, like the liberation theology.
That's right.
And today they constitute a ascending political power in Brazil. They left those small churches on the garages. They have an incredible political influence. They predicate anti-democratic ideas. They spread hate speech, defamation of the progressive force. They deny science. They control really minds and hearts in a way that they cannot be liable for. And Gerald Ford, former US president, admitted that the CIA used missionaries as an agent. Can you confirm this? And is this still practice?
I can confirm it. And officially, they stopped the practice in 1975 during the Ford administration. But that's just the CIA. Now the FBI cultivates these movements. You're exactly right about these figures. For example, I was in Guatemala not too long ago, and one of the things that I learned there are that the two fastest growing religions in Guatemala, which of course is a traditionally Catholic country, the two fastest growing religions are evangelical, this right-wing evangelical Christianity, and Saudi-style Islam.
Oh, really? Where does that come from?
One of the biggest buildings in Guatemala City is a brand new mosque that the Saudi royal family has built. And Guatemalans are converting to Islam now. I'll tell you, as a practicing Greek Orthodox, and we're very, very similar, of course, to the Catholic Church, going back to the time of Christ, we don't even consider these groups to be Christian.
What do you consider them?
We consider them to be right-wing political groups. And in most cases, their biggest issue, their biggest cause is the support of Israel. They want all Jews to return to Israel because it'll hasten the return of Christ, right? They want to push the second coming of Christ, and the only way to do that is to get all Jews back to Israel. So that's oftentimes what they focus on. But you're exactly right. These right-wing groups are very political, far more political than they are religious. They're dangerous, and they are actively in opposition to what they perceive to be left-wing liberation theology. And it's funny because in many cases, the theology is not liberation at all. It's just mainstream Catholicism.
It is. It's just original. It's just the primitive Christianism, what we call it.
That's it.
And it's very hunting what you're telling me. You were telling me the CIA is supporting such groups, and through those groups, they will dominate people. Right? This is something that you would affirm. It's not just a theory.
Oh no! You put somebody on a salary. You give them $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 a month, and you tell them what to do, and they report back to you every month. Yeah. And
what about Latin America for CIA? I mean, why CIA? So we have a long-standing history with CIA. When you we're talking about the 75, this torture law. Before that, CIA agents trained Brazilian militaries for torture. And one of
Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina, Mexico, even all over the place.
Why are they so interested in Latin America? Why are we the targets?
Yes, because this is our backyard, right? We have the Monroe Doctrine, which is still an overriding concern in American foreign policy. We see this as our area. We don't want the Russians here. We don't want the Chinese here. We don't want anybody else. I wrote an op-ed in 2008 for the Los Angeles Times talking exactly about this and how the Iranians had invested in a bicycle factory in Venezuela. And you would have thought that they were building nuclear weapons to point at the United States. The CIA was so crazy angry that the Iranians would open a bicycle factory. We don't want anybody in Latin America other than us. That's it.
And you telling me that, so the CIA, it'd be very interesting to understand how the CIA may change its culture, whether you have a Trump in power or whether you have a Biden in power. Do you see any changes? Just the business as usual?
Intelligence policy and foreign policy are almost always consistent. And certainly at the CIA, it's consistent across parties, whether it's a Democrat or Republican, nothing is going to change. Donald Trump was an unusual president because he was just so out of the mainstream. He was such a right-wing protectionist extremist that there were some differences in foreign policy, but Donald Trump is gone. And no matter who the Democratic and Republican nominees are going to be in 2024, I don't think there will be any significant changes in foreign policy, defense policy, or intelligence policy.
So Brazil, Latin America, since we exist as such countries, we have been colonized country in a way, either by the Portuguese or the Spanish, or either by the American and North Americans. Do you see a way out for us to be for our sovereignty?
I do.
How can we go against this huge machinery that is in America?
This was something that I learned in Pakistan. If you want the U.S. out of your business, the only way to do it is to educate your population and develop your economy. That's really it. Otherwise, you're going to have American meddling and manipulation. And, the United States is going to come down there with these giant sacks of money, bribing your officials and essentially buying your foreign policy. The only way to get that to stop is is through education and economic development.
Would you do all over again, John?
Absolutely.
Would you do all over again?
Absolutely,
Why
yes.
was it worth it?
It was worth it. Somebody had to say something about the torture program. I just assumed somebody else would, but I'm glad I did. The cost was high. It was very high, but it was worth it. I can sleep at night. My children are proud of me, and it was worth it. It had to be done.
Great. John, I'd just like to hear your final words from you. And thank you for this absolutely amazing interview. It was such a insight. And I don't think how many people has the privilege to talk to an ex-CIA agent willing to say anything.
There aren't many of us.
CIA, probably CIA agent don't even say their proper name.
No.
So it's such a huge privilege for all us here that will be listening to this interview.
Thank you so
with your
much.
openness, your shiny personality, and to know you this very, very interesting life and this insight. I don't think we got to see this in another time, maybe another lifetime.
That's
so
right.
I'll be so happy to hear your final words.
Oh, thank you. You know, we have to keep up the fight. Just remember, I tell myself this all the time. We're the good guys. We're right and they're wrong. And so if you believe in what you're committed to, just keep fighting and keep pushing, because eventually everybody else will come around. You know, a clear majority of the American people supported a torture policy. But I knew torture was wrong. And now we've gotten to a point where torture has been outlawed in the United States, that Gina Haspel, the former head of the CIA, admitted that the torture program was a mistake. Senator John McCain stood up on the floor of the Senate and said that the American people would never have known what their country was doing if I hadn't told them. So if you believe what you believe, then stick with it and keep fighting.
John, actually, I have 2 more questions.
Sure.
Do you have time?
Sure.
A little bit more time. So you sent me an article, The Kite Runner, which I couldn't open straight away from your front page of the New York Times, for saving the lives of many children in Afghanistan. Can you tell us a bit about this?
After I left the CIA, I was working for a private company, and I got a call from Paramount Studios asking me if I would consider going to Afghanistan to rescue some children who had appeared in the film The Kite Runner. Apparently, there were bootleg copies of the film that had made their way to Afghanistan from India. Afghans are very simple people, many of them, and they couldn't tell that this was just a made-up story. They thought that it was real. And there were 2 objectionable scenes in the movie. One where a boy was raped by another boy, and another where a boy was forced to do a homoerotic dance for a member of the Taliban. So the studio told me, go to Afghanistan, assess the security situation, assess the danger to the children, and then if the children were indeed in danger, to get them and their families out of the country. So I took 2 weeks of vacation. I went to Afghanistan secretly. I went through India and met with a lot of people, determined that these children really were in danger. And to make a long story short, I ended up getting 27 people, the children and all of their family members, out of the country. I bribed everybody in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to give us exit visas and passports. And then we rented vans and drove to the airport. And I went and I said, I need 27 seats plus 1 on the first flight out of here, and I don't care where it goes. Oh. And they said, well, the first flight, because my goal was to get everybody to Dubai, right?
Okay.
I said, we need to get to Dubai. Well, they said, well, there's a flight to India in 11 hours, and then you can go from India to Dubai. I said, no, we got to get out right now.
No.
And they said, well, there's a flight to Iran. Well, I'm an American and a former CIA officer. I can't fly to Iran. But I had no choice. So I said, give me 28 tickets to Iran. So, so we flew to Iran on Air, it's an Iranian airline. And we got off the plane in Iran, and I got 28 more tickets to Dubai. I mean, there were flights like every 2 hours to Dubai. A friend of mine met us in Dubai, and we ended up enrolling the children in schools, in Dari language schools. We got jobs for the fathers, and we got apartments for all 27 of them, to live together as families, and rescued them. And then I flew back home and went right back to work to do my regular job.
When was that?
That was 2007. I was working at Deloitte & Touche at the time, one of the big 4 accounting firms.
And do you know what happened to those children?
Yes, I'm very disappointed to tell you that after a year, the parents decided to go back to Afghanistan. And the studio asked me to call them, so I did. And I said, you're making a terrible mistake, right? A terrible mistake that you're going to go back. We gave all of you a brand new life in Dubai. The Emiratis gave them residency visas. There's no reason to go back. But they did. They all went back. All of them, all 27 of them. And then I lost touch with them.
What do you, so now that we have the withdrawal from Afghanistan and we know the balance of this war, what do you think of the withdrawal, and what do you think the future holds for Afghanistan and the people?
Oh, I think we should have withdrawn, in December of 2001. Our legislative mandate in Afghanistan was to destroy Al-Qaeda. And we destroyed Al-Qaeda by December of 2001. Al-Qaeda, for all intents and purposes, no longer exists. There are little tiny elements of it spread around Yemen, the Sahel, but in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda doesn't exist anymore. And so, as soon as George W. Bush said the words nation building, we knew we were in trouble. We knew we were in trouble. Sure, we wanted to capture or kill bin Laden, but there was no Al-Qaeda left to attack.
What did they want to do there? Why do you think they stayed?
I think they stayed for a couple of reasons. I think, one, because of the rare earth metals that exist in Afghanistan. They're worth $1 trillion, and now the Chinese are mining them. But I think also we wanted to just kind of screw the Russians at the end of the day. That we wanted to prove to ourselves and to the Russians that we could succeed where the Russians failed. And the truth is that historically nobody has succeeded in Afghanistan, going back to Alexander the Great. So, another thing too, and this is something that Americans never understood, or at least they never appreciated. The Taliban didn't come, from the moon and land in Afghanistan. The Taliban are the sons of Afghans, right? Every family in Afghanistan, at least every Sunni Muslim family in Afghanistan, has members of the Taliban in their family. These are not foreign invaders. They're not space aliens. They're Afghans. And so who are these families going to side with? They're going to side with their sons and their nephews and brothers, or are they going to side with an American occupation force? We never had any possibility of winning that war. Never.
Amazing. John, thank you so much. Now I allow you your final words, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here with us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Great to see you. My pleasure speaking.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.